there, the Chattering Magpie here with you once again to talk about Ascendance of a Bookworm, Season 3, Episode 7. This episode opens with Delia telling Mine all about baby Dirk and how he had this really mysterious fever and some mysterious bumps that appeared when he cried, but that also seemed to vanish the moment that he was seen to. Because it comes and goes, it's not really a disease, but rather a condition. So during this episode, Mine is going to investigate the nature of this condition. Or at least that's what I thought would happen, because almost immediately Mine is able to figure out what Dirk has. All she has to do is touch his forehead when he begins crying again and when they let him have his little crying fit. And immediately what comes to her mind is her own devouring heat and how it went out of control when she was letting her emotions take over. Now, like I said in the previous video, they switched around the order of the light novel so that this scene where Mine is figuring out what's going on with Dirk actually happened much earlier and should have happened in the middle of what was last episode. In the light novel, some of the things that are mentioned that don't actually show up in the anime is how Mine is able to recognize that this little baby has a devouring. When Delia touches his forehead and says, hey, he's burning up, Mine also touches his forehead, and in her mind, this image of her mana box appears. The light novel has it a little bit more different. Instead of a mental image of her mana box, she gets a shock, like an electrical shock. Additionally, she felt an almost physical push from him. It was as if he was rejecting her. Not only that, but it seemed the contact also seemed to hurt Dirk because he started crying even harder and his skin began to bubble up again. What I found interesting is that Dirk rejected Mine's touch when he was having a fever, which means that his mana itself was rejecting Mine's mana at that moment. But when he settled down and his fever went away, he was fed and he was happy, she touched his forehead again and did not experience that same shock, that rejection that she had felt earlier. What's more, Dirk didn't even react at her touch. I don't think that babies cry around Mine because they feel her mana. I just think that they don't like her or she's just bad at babies. At least this is what I think. One final note that I wanted to say is, actually a really stupid one, but from here until the end of the episode, we never see the fancy crib again. Whether it is in Mine's chambers or in the orphanage, Dirk is just placed in a box that has some bedding and a blanket, and that's it. The quality and the animation sometimes look so different from episode to episode. So I'm not surprised, and I get it, they're devoting the best people to the most crucial of episodes. That's why you get these inconsistencies. So it's just a minor observation. I don't think it really signifies much in the end. Now, Mine is wise enough not to say her suspicions to Delia when she asks if she knows what it could be. Instead, she calls Lutz over and, as secretly as possible, asks him to get some tau fruit from the forest so that they can use it to control Dirk's mana until they figure out how they can help him. I found the shot of Dirk holding a little tau fruit so adorable for some reason, like baby tau for a baby, so cute. So anyway, Mine is cautious enough about her suspicions that when she wants to talk about the baby with Ferdinand, she asks if it is okay to talk with him in his office since she's worried about who might be watching or listening. And so he hands her a magical tool that would prevent eavesdropping. So she tells him her concerns and he confirms that if the child is showing that many signs as an infant, he should have an abundance of mana, and tells her that Dirk needs to have a contract with a noble immediately or otherwise he wouldn't survive. At this moment, we get an explanation of what a contract with a noble would look like, and they use a different kind of art style than the one that I've grown so used to, the silhouettes one. They used here flat icons, and it was kind of weird. The art style didn't quite match, but at least we were treated to this really dramatic scene of a devouring child in a dungeon or in a cell, with a ball and chain in his ankle. Talk about dramatic. I do not believe that any devouring children would be kept in these conditions because they are valuable sources of mana. I do not believe any noble in his right mind would treat a valuable investment like that. Now, that was my thought. But when I went to the light novel and I read this section, I actually found out that there is a possibility that Dirk could end up with a family that would treat him basically like a caged animal. Nobles were driven by their want for mana, for maintaining their land and using their noble magic tools. Devouring contracts weren't something they wanted to be particularly public, so while well-raised children would be given positions as servants or future mistresses, those who were poorly raised would often be locked in the cellar and treated like animals. In the light novel, Mine is so worried and depressed over the thought of what could be Dirk's potential future that she asks the high priest if he could maybe adopt Dirk, and he flat out says no. Because Mine got so depressed at the thought that Dirk could end up with somebody who would treat him bad, that is when Ferdinand gave an exasperated sigh and said, well, if you're that concerned about him, you can sign with him yourself after Karsten adopts you. So there really wasn't a need for a smiling Ferdinand in here. Like, he was actually just exasperated with her being like all sad over Dirk, which leads us to my airing of grievances. I have said before that I don't mind a smiling Ferdinand as long as it's within character, and I have also given anime Ferdinand great leeway in terms of emotional intelligence here. Ferdinand in the anime is just nicer overall, but this was just too much for me. I got several people sending me screenshots of Ferdinand smiling here. They were like, "Ooh, look, you got smiling Ferdinand this episode." And I was like, thanks, I hate it. I have read the entire web novel, and I know that we get to a point where Ferdinand is a softer, nicer individual, at least to Mine. But it just takes a while for it to happen. To me, he just looks really creepy. I'm kind of getting the exact same vibes I get when seeing lifelike AI. You know, you get that uncanny valley. But in this case, I'm getting an uncanny valley of smiling Ferdinands. I just don't like it, and I can't quite explain why. But anyway, enough about that. You're here for Bookworm, so let's get back to that. So the whole gang is struggling with the colored ink. Not only is it really hard to find what oil and what pigment combination will make what color, it's also now patently obvious that they're gonna have a problem with making the colors of the ink last. Thankfully though, there is Aoife, who makes a grand return as the one who gives Mine some really good advice. And this week's advice is, hey, have you tried fixing agents for the colors? That's the thing that's gonna make sure that the colors don't fade over time. This appears in the light novel, not in the anime, but before Aoife can tell Mine how to make those fixing agents, Mine has to investigate whether or not there's a magical contract that would prohibit Aoife from disclosing those secrets. Thankfully, the recipe for making her own fixing agents is not bound by any contract, so they're all good. Now, by far, the biggest plot point of this episode is Delia bonding with Dirk. And it is thanks in large part to Dirk that we see how Delia is softening up and becoming a better human being, honestly. She began as an orphan child who did not understand the concept of family, and now she is basically the epitome of a caring older sister, and that is so heartwarming to see. Now, in case we had forgotten, Delia has deep trauma related to the orphanage, so at a moment when she needs to go to the orphanage, she does so really reluctantly. She doesn't even want to go to the orphanage, even if little Dirk is there. But one thing that I really want to note from here is, the inconsistency here. Okay, so Mine needs to go to the orphanage. She has Daniel go with her, but Daniel says you can't go without an attendant. And basically the only reason why she needs to have an attendant is that she needs a person to open and close the doors for her. Honestly, last episode we saw Daniel open a door to let Wilma into Mine's chambers. He did it once, why can't he do it again, especially if Delia is in such distress? I know it's inconsistencies of the anime, and that's fine. It's just something that I found funny, that he makes such a big deal about it now, but he was okay with opening doors before. Now, Delia can't stand the orphanage, but at the sight of Dirk possibly coming to harm by falling from his box, she runs in and saves the day before he can fall, hit the ground. Dirk is adorable and the kids love him, and heck, I am beginning to love him, and I'm not even a fan of babies. And so Mine reflects to herself that the orphanage is no longer the same as the one that Delia used to know, so maybe, just maybe, she might be alright. And yet, when we're getting this glimpse of hope, we get this shot. And all I can say is, dang it, I know! Okay, we get this shot of Arno talking to Delia. We don't know what he said, but Delia looks surprised and upset. And so, after Mine returns from the orphanage with Wilma as her attendant, they hear Delia yelling, and she's beside herself, saying that she can't trust the high priest, while Fran says, yes, you can. And when Mine opens the door, Delia confronts her and asks her what's the deal about this adoption that she just heard about. And so, that's the end of the episode. We get left on a cliffhanger. But after the ending credits, we get our beloved Chibi scene. And I actually like this Chibi scene a lot. I like Chibi scenes that explain a lot of the world building that they weren't able to fit into the actual episode. These are my favorite kind of Chibi scenes, honestly. So this is an explanation of how mana and mana compressing works. We learned that Dirk was born with quite a lot of mana, probably more than Mine herself when she was at that age. However, when Urano's adult memory took over, Mine's mana vastly increased, but it's not because of some byproduct of being isekai'd, but it's rather because Urano had the mental capacity to compress and compress and compress to fight back the devouring heat that would have killed her otherwise. The light novel explains it really well, so I'm just gonna read it from there. Mine asks Ferdinand, doesn't that mean that all nobles could have more mana if they practice from a young age? And he replies, don't imply that it's so simple, fool. Allowing mana to fill your entire body before containing it with sheer force of mind is to dance with death, putting yourself on the verge of being eaten alive. You have experience with that, no? Yes, it's happened countless times. It really was hard to count how many times I had battled with the heat to push it back inside of my body. In the end, I had so much mana because over the year and a half that had passed between me starting to live as Mine and me joining the temple, I had spent every day on the verge of death. It is difficult to compress mana without having a mind strong enough to force it into place. Does it not make sense to wait until children grow and can be taught the proper methods for doing so? Every year there are a number of students who fail to control their mana and who consequently have a brush with death. Brushes with death had been a normal daily affair for me, but noble children were given magic tools from birth to shield them from such danger. They just poured their mana into these tools until they could go to the Royal Academy and learn to control it. So then as Urano compressed that box of mana, she made much more room for even more mana inside her body. In the light novel it says that Mine compressed every single second, never easing down on how tightly she kept the box shut, because the moment she stopped compressing was the day her mana would rage out of control. Ferdinand tells her there may be some harm or some kind of repercussions that would come from her having done this, but he won't tell her until she reaches the Nobles Academy. And creators, you better not be tantalizing us viewers with this and then not extend the anime to season 10 or whatever when she finally gets to the Royal Academy, because that would just be so mean. Teasing is not right if you're not willing to follow through in the end, okay? Now, to me, this was a slower paced episode, and I get why there were some complaints that it felt like this was an episode where we're literally subjected to watching paint dry. There was a lot of dialogue too, and lots of information about mana and noble contracts and all that stuff. But there was a lot of Delia and Dirk bonding moments, which actually is really important. I will not deny that they were super adorable and I did not mind them at all. So while I wish that they had gotten into the ominous developments that are hinted at in the episode title of next week, we'll have to wait and see, and I'm sure it'll be great, because thanks to Arno, that sneaky snake, that inevitable ball that's gonna snowball into something big, has just started its roll. Anyway, I hope that this is just the first core, because as the weeks tick by, I realize that once the season ends, I will be very sad indeed, and I will need to find ways to cope with it. So that is the end of this episode. Let me know what were your thoughts on it, what were your favorite parts about it. Light novel readers, please be sure to tag and hide your spoilers in the comments. Thank you so much for being such good sports about it. And finally, a special thanks to Jonathan R. Masteller for his continued support via Super Thanks, as well as to Sora Hikari and TJ for supporting me on Ko-fi. You are the best, and I send you many sparkly hearts. Now, if you'd also like to see your name here, you can support my channel through my Ko-fi page. You can also support my channel by using the Amazon affiliate links to purchase the light novels. Links to these things and to my socials are on the video description. Hope you have an excellent day that does not involve uncanny Ferdinand smiles, but instead has many frowny, grumpy McGrumpy pants grimaces because honestly, they're way better than fake smiles. They're the best. Until next week then, bye bye.